Get ready for a deep dive into the greatest labyrinth of information, revisionist history, covering the hidden legacy of an empire lost to history, the Great Tartaria. For the next 2 hours, your host Victor B will be clearing out the mud beneath your feet to give a clearer view of ancient and modern history. And there's no turning back once you open that door. With Great Tartary, many mysteries vanish, while other mysteries unknown surface. Technasma, catastrophism, pseudo-timelines, recent civilization resets, Phoenicia and the Moorish legacy in America, all will be explained. Every Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, you can expect to listen to this unfolding narrative which seeks to explain the origin of ancient and modern civilization, and how it was hijacked, and how we can retrieve the lost information of our advanced Tartar ancestors. With your host, Victor Boog, on Radio Tartary in Studio B.
Nice to have you here. Welcome to Revolution Radio, Studio B, listening to Radio Tartary. So, hello, Philip. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty much fine, thanks. I'm really happy to be with you guys. That you
awesome.
Invited me today.
Yeah, good to hear, man. Yeah, I know a lot of our listeners are very interested in the Mudflood, and who better to have on than the guy who actually put out the Mudflood to the Western world. You coined the phrase Mudflood, right?
Well, if we know that the brand is something that is hiding actual definition and actual meaning from the public, then the Mudflood is actually the brand, and it's not just the two words, mud and flood. It's just sounded really. I would say it would be like a good slogan or something like mud flood. So it's like a good rhyme. For some song, or maybe conspiracy song. So I guess that's for that was made in concern for it to be something like that. So people would really be quick to understand what it's about. So, but it's covering a lot of stuff. So it's not just about some flow of mud or clay or whatever. So it's just it's just the layer of conspiracy theories in this two words.
Well, that's a very good detail to get out there, because I hear from a lot of people who don't really understand it that what about all those very flat places where a flow of mud wouldn't be possible, and you just know then that they have just reacted to the word mud flood and not really listened to the details of what you've been saying and others have been saying. So that's a very good thing to get people to hear. But Philip, I wanted to ask you, because I'm very interested in what got you into the theory, so to speak, because I don't think it's a theory, it's an obvious fact. But what made you discover the Mudflood?
The first thing that was really curious about it, that I was just, living in the city of Omsk. It was like, maybe the mid of 2001, 2003, and I was walking each and every day near this Omsk Historical Museum, and nothing significant was in it. So it's like, just ordinary old building, nothing very, not very beautiful or something. But across the road, there was a dramatical theater, the theater of drama. I don't know, how do you say it in your language? So it's like, it's not like comedy, but, and not opera. So it's like, I don't know, theater for drama.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so, and that theater was like also having a huge basement floor, and I was in that theater, so I was always wondering who made this theater. So because it was like built in 19th century. So and that was probably one of the beautifulest building in that city of Omsk. So everybody knew about it. So and when I went to Moscow, when I arrived in Moscow, it was like 2010, 2011, something like this. So I also met a bunch of buildings here in Moscow like this. So I was very interested in that. And then I saw a photograph of that historical museum of Omsk where I was walking around each and every day, and I saw that they were made an excavation close to that wall, and we saw the windows, not just in like a basement windows, but they were continuous and were down up to like 3 meters in depth, something like this. So, and there were also some doors there. So, who in the world would be making the doors into the ground? So I don't know. And they were
Yeah.
all buried, and the windows were with the glass. So it was like not that like bricked up windows, because I met a bunch of bricked up windows later. But those windows were with the glass, so nobody even cared about the glass when they were, burying, or maybe, I don't know, leveling the road. I would probably doubt that. So I think if the people were making this happening, they probably saw that the windows were with the glass, and some of that clay and mud probably got into that building. But I don't know. So that was very interesting, and I saw a bunch of buildings like this in Moscow here, and was walking around near my office and picturing, filming all this stuff. And we got a bunch of people here who were, trying to make a theory of this thing. So that probably what got me in, and probably the knowledge that I had before about Tartaria, about all these history falsifications and alternative history, like stretching of the medieval period longer than it was really in real life. So,
Hmm.
and that is what was what got me in probably.
Well, that's interesting that so you knew about Tartaria before you knew about the Mudflood.
Yeah, of course,
Okay.
because that was after, of course, that was after.
Okay. That's interesting for me to know because so you were already looking with a new eyes, or you were very open-minded at least when you discovered the Mudflood.
First, I was, we knew that Tartaria was destroyed in 19th century, and we were searching for some hints because people were saying about the war, were saying about some bombardment, some carpet bomb, whatever, like maybe nuclear comparable weapon. I don't know.
Hmm.
So what we could be saying is nuclear right now, but something like huge craters were all around Tartaria. So that territory that was called Tartaria before on those maps that we saw. So
Yeah.
at least there was the explanation of how it disappeared, and nobody knew about what happened actually. But then we saw these, buried buildings, and 3, 4 floors underground, and those, tunnels that we knew before, that we had a lot of tunnels. So they also were plugged into this theory because we knew about the tunnel system before.
Hmm.
We saw those buildings were buried. So you have to understand that. And then we all figured out that those tunnels just were the streets of the previous um, civilizations, and that's why they, like, buried in them under the mud, and we see them way more deeper than they were before. So that was really the explanation. And near my office in Moscow, we see this huge underground system. It's officially was open before, and special Russian KGBs and stuff like this were using those systems for their purposes during the World War II. So everybody knew about it. So it was like before the 19th century system. So, and that was easily explainable with the Mudflood. So that's why this underground system is buried right now, because he was buried with the mud. So
Well, it's an interesting background information for me to understand because am I correct when I say, Philip, that there was a group of researchers or a research community in Russia that talked about Tartaria and Mudflood way before, or at least before anybody in Europe did it?
yeah. Because we are the ones that saw that you guys have this Britannica, mentioning. So Britannica
Oh yeah,
1757 or something. So, and it was
yeah,
mentioned in Tartaria,
Tartaria.
and that
Yeah.
was like, there was kind of a proof to what we saw during that exhibition where Putin was showed those all those maps.
Hmm.
Give me a second, please.
Yeah, that's all right. I remember, wasn't that, oh, that's a long time ago, Putin was shown those maps. I think it was back in 2010, if I recall correctly. I will ask Philip again when he's here.
Yeah, it was
Um,
probably like 2007, something like this, when we saw.
oh, was it that far? Oh, wow. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's a long time ago.
yeah, I'm
Um,
I'm in this since like 2007, 2006 at least. So maybe even before that, because it's
yeah.
like a huge puzzle that was first. It was like Slavic Aryan Vedas that was coming out, and those guys were actually in the center of this movement was in Omsk where I was living. So that's why I knew all those people who were promoting, and they were mentioning Tartaria even then. So everybody knew about those maps, and people saw those maps, and people saw those ancient 17th, 18th, 19th century maps. So,
Hmm.
and we saw the progression when there were no Russia, and oops, there's Russia in 19th century. So it's
Hmm.
like it was
Yeah.
interesting.
And then there was the whole Fomenko deal, and it's very interesting because Fomenko is from your country. So what a question I would have for it may be obvious to you, but and not obvious to a lot of others. Why do you think it was the Russians and the Eastern Slavic people who discovered all of these things before anyone else?
I think that is because of the break of the system. So it's like the Soviet Union was like containing all this knowledge inside of those archives, and nobody actually knew any information about, was researching about those Vedic knowledge that was before the Christianity and before the system of what we know as Imperial Russia.
Hmm.
So, and a bunch of those scientists like Rybakov and many more, and we were searching for those mentioning for those references in the books of 19th century, and we saw a bunch of references to those books. So, and that was kind of confirming that some research was going on in Soviet Union, but it was closed, and it was like kept confidential. But when the Soviet Union got lost in history, as what I say, and
Hmm.
became Russian Federation, a bunch of those archives were open, and a bunch of those, I don't know, scammers, leakers, whistleblowers, I don't know, how do you call them? It's just a bunch of those people who were trying to make money on those sensations, and they started posting those archives, and it was like nobody was even controlling it. So the information got leaked from all those Soviet sources. Like it was like nobody was even everybody was selling this information. So it was like uh, and it was time like when people were caring about the making money, not the actual truth or finding out the reasons of this or that event or this or that reference in the ancient books. So nobody was actually analyzing. People started researching ancient Egyptian technologies, but not even looking what is around Moscow, because we have a lot more to learn than if you go to Egypt, because Egypt have some, of course, have some huge evidences of ancient technologies, but it doesn't have anything that we know as a mud flood, constructions or something. So even though it's all connected, of course, but some people still think that
Have you
ancient
seen some of the maps I have where it shows that there are star forts in around Cairo and the pyramids?
Yeah, of course. That's where I came with the information about the mining and all this, system of traders and, ancient trading system where we have all those outposts of miners and traders, and they were all connected with this, Starfort systems, which also could be used for protection from the, local people, I don't know, fish or animals or whatever. So, and those systems could be, having energy, biological screens, or what we know is some ancient technology that probably was used also to carry huge weights and for long distances, as we can see evidence of that actually occurs. And we see some pipelines or something, or even I would call that pipelines.
We have seen many of those ancient things, and I note that you mentioned that they were ancient miners and traders, and I find that very interesting because some of the ancient people that we have mentioned from our history is the Phoenicians and the Tartarians, and both these people have been said to have been mining copper or mining silver, and also being merchants. Take, for instance, like Genoa. Some say the etymology for that city is the city of Noah. And if you look at the city seal, it is a griffin. And some translations of the people living there from the early on inhabitants were called Ligurians. And if you translate that into a certain language, it translates into Tartarians. A Black Sheep researcher found that out, so shout out to him. And so it's interesting because there's references to both, Tartarians being miners and traders, and so the Phoenicians as well. And maybe when we read that in some of the books, we just think that, oh yeah, they just dug a few mines. But when we really look at the scale of the evidence around the world, like what Mike Ferreira shows us, we see that this mining practice could really, we just have to know what we're looking at. And if we know more about it, we can see that it is astronomically big, the scale of mining that has gone on this plane. It's crazy.
We don't even know the period that the Earth was actually mined for. I don't know. Maybe it's a couple of centuries, or maybe it's a couple of millenniums. Who knows? So.
Yeah, and even the mainstream history says that the Romans did hydraulic mining, and you can see Roman hydraulic mining leftovers around what they say was the Roman Empire of ancient days, but it was probably something entirely different, right?
Yeah, that's where all this deception comes out, because that's where the layers of edited information crisscross together, and we see some nations or some people groups that were called like Romans, but we also see the copy of them in the medievals were called Holy Romans, and so this is where it all mixes together. We see the ancient culture that is thrown back into the era before Christ, and we see the same culture that is placed in the medieval and cold Renaissance era. So it's like the copy of each and every thing is like, throughout the history is visible, and it's probably evident, and that's what Fomenko was basing his knowledge, and his idea was that they were copying different persons and copy paste them into and plug them into this group of people, this country or that country, and so we see the copy of the Holy Roman history into the Chinese history. Also, people did research about that, and we saw this edited information in and plugged into the Chinese history. So I think we should stick to the obvious, that we don't know actually how many editions this information passed, right? And so I try to stick to 19th century as the base, and like what we have the 0 point, zero ground, I don't know.
Yeah.
And if we figure out what was happening in 19th century, we probably would be able to go further. And because the previous reset that I found was made probably in the middle of 19th century. That's where we lose the chain of logical historical narrative, I would say, because
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, we don't
where.
know the chain of custody with the information. And like, have you ever tried to trace your genealogy and really look into like finding real information about people like 6 generations up your past? Because I have, and it's very hard. It's very difficult. Everything is just vague, and very little to no information exists to verify. You only have names and claims of dates and possible deaths, and it's crazy. And no one really like talks about how little we know in history. When I meet a historian or a student, I just like to remind them just how little we know, and also talk about like when you go back into antiquities, and when the antiquity pieces hit, when we go back into the 1700s, the antiquities are so few, and there's so many copies of copies. So it would seem that some of the real original stuff is so rare and so highly prized and in private collections that someone is have an interest in keeping, you know, our disadvantages up, so we cannot see or have a distorted vision of what really happened.
Yeah, I would say that they definitely track all those evidence references, and if they find some new reference that was, missing for like century or something, somebody will definitely grab it from you, like put it in some museum or something, claim it to be, maybe prohibited information or something like this. So there's always those hunters for the artifacts, and that's where editions comes out, because when you have a period of some, chaos, like probably was during the reset time, you probably can do anything with this information and edit each and every book. Nobody's going to remember what was written there, because people would care only about how to save their lives and save their, save their living and close friends, close families, and stuff like this. So this is how the things going on. Look what happened during the last 2 months. Like what is actually in developing, and this panic that it could be, changing stuff. So we would think that it was calm and easy in the 19th century, but at certain point we see the evidence of some catastrophic events that was, mentioned by different poets and authors, like A Year Without the Summer and stuff like this. So something was really weird, and we see like a bunch of contradicting facts in some information.
We also hear references from some Western scholars in the 18 and the 1700s saying that the highly scientific nation of Tartaria was destroyed in a great catastrophe. And those symbol words, it's a quote from Bailey, a scholar, and those symbol words just that means that there were some people in the Western world that researched the idea that there was a highly scientific nation called Tartaria, and that it was destroyed in a catastrophe. And don't you find that interesting that the same story can be found in the Western world? it's just very obscure, and you just have to know where to look.
Yeah, it's like throughout these edited history. Just look at the first fight. Who had the first fight? The first fight had the Greeks versus Trojans, right?
Yeah.
And so the Greeks beat the Trojans, and those Trojans, disappeared somehow. So some of them, became people of
Assimilated in other
yes, they
yeah.
went to Sicily or something. That's what officials say, and then some of them went to and created Venice. And so this clan of those people, and some of them created Carthage. And this Carthage guys fought the Roman guys who were like, claiming to be the ruling nation back in the day. So, and also Roman defeated Carthage guys who, were probably the equal to Romans, or even maybe even stronger in some, troops. But this is the official history. We know all those fights happen in each and every era, and some nations just disappear. So it's like it's okay.
How does a whole
but
people disappear, right? Don't you know like the story of the Spanish conquerors when they went to Peru and found Pizarro when he went to Cusco and found that place, and allegedly gave one of the inhabitants a virus, so they all died within a decade or so, and then they completely disappeared from one virus. Don't
yeah, I
you?
mean, all this information is written in the books, and we read it, and we like comprehend it. We like examine it in our minds, and it's like settles down in some narrative, and this is the accepted narrative, right? So we
Yeah.
accept this narrative, we live with it, but as soon as we see some evidence of something contradicting to this, like we see this ancient technological evidence, or maybe a building, or maybe the architecture doesn't lie, because you can be editing the architecture, like you can renovate it, or maybe you can destroy it, or maybe you forgot about it and somebody excavated it eventually while constructing something. And that's where we comes the Mudflood, and we see all this evidence everywhere. Each and every excavation ends up by finding something like brick building underground and stuff like this. And this is where all this narrative is just totally destroyed, right? And that's what contradicting. That's what why 19th century is most important, because we are not fighting the guys who was talking about ancient Egypt like 10,000 years ago or something, and saying, look guys, this is all 19th century. We are fighting the narrative of the brick buildings somehow buried in the mud and clay for like several floors underground, brick tunnels buried underground. How can you explain that? So
You can.
we're not even talking about the megalithic concrete buildings like ancient Egypt buildings and stuff like this. They appear to be the chemical plants and all this stuff that were used by miners, of course, because nothing really big is made without purpose. So we have to understand that all the huge constructions were made with some purpose, and that purpose was technological. And if we see something like something like a building which is right now a cultural building, like a cathedral or something, that could be a building of some power plant before. And that's easily explained when you find out that it was renovated in 19th century, and it was totally changed in some details that show us that the information that was how it looked before is hidden right now, and it was hidden with purpose to hide. And those buildings appear to be burned or destroyed in World War II, World War One, and then totally disappear from the map, of course. But we see some pictures from the 19th century, and then those buildings were still could be pictured with the photographs. And so that is really interesting, because those disappeared buildings are like a huge piece of that pie that is called the Mudflood. You can research it forever, because we have so many disappeared buildings that were pictured in the 19th century and then were totally destroyed for some stupid reason. Like, you build a building for 10 years and then you totally destroy it.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, endless. Even in Denmark, I got so many contenders, and especially we have what I find amazing about this topic on a wider scale is that we have the same story repeated in all countries of some civilization in history, right? If they go back more than 200 years. And it's like some of those patterns are like mental institutions and old prisons and the same type of architecture in the huge cities and star forts and the same type of batteries and the same type of cannons and the same type of everything. Even in the military today, they all have the five-pointed star on their uniforms. It's like there's this unification to the whole world that is just so apparent when we pull this whole together. And some of those deception patterns we see by some of the topics like old mental institution and like a lack of construction photos and spurious claims of weird, always over the top buildings for schools and old hospitals and old women's houses. And we have these weird little threats that is found in all of the countries, like old pack houses, as they're called in Scandinavia on harbors, are always in the same style of architecture, like the Northern European old trains, like even the old smaller train stations, they all appear to have this red brick Oriental style of architecture all around Denmark, and they're all mud flooders, and it's just so it encompasses so many things, and that's why it stands out as a very, very apparent logical consistency found everywhere. And the story, you're forced to realize that the story is very close to reality one way or another. We're onto something. It may be few details that are unclear at this point, but I think we will just keep confirming and confirming what you have thought and others have thought for a very long time. And we're, every day for me, when I look through the archives, it's the same thing. I find the same themes in all of the different European archives. So there must have been a unified world before this modern civilization that we see, and it must have been very, in a higher state of civilization that we have been led to conceive. It's undeniable when you really look at all the evidence, and that may take some time, but if you have done that, I cannot see how you cannot see that there has to have been an empire or a unified trade union that influenced every corner of the earth. Like, Philip, you agree, right?
Yeah, and you sure agree with this concept, because I was trying to talk about it like 3 years ago, because the same source that was given the information about the Tartarian maps, the same source that I mentioned before, was giving us also the information about this united world country, or whatever you call it. It was called Rus, Ros, Ras, whatever. So, it represented the red color, the color of the flag. And so it is actually that culture that was before, that antique culture.
Yeah, and I believe the Bible talks about it like in different ways, like the Edomites and the land of Edom, right? The Red Land. And I would like Ross is very close to red.
Yeah. Some a bunch of those toponyms, we call it toponyms or geographical geonyms, whatever. Those the names that left from the ancient times still exist, And these language connections, along with cultural, dress, ornament, design, architectural connections that you talk about, are also evident because people know about these language groups, that all those language groups are connected to one pre-flood or whatever language that was before. And Bible also mentioned it as a unified language when they're talking about the Tower of Babel, about the people who were talking one language, and so started to talk different languages. And this is easily explained with the mudflood and the reset theory. When you have such prospering civilization, and it has some catastrophe that it doesn't actually expect, or some tragical occasions, or maybe invasion from the parasitic creatures, or maybe some invaders, whatever. And they create some reset for the civilization that totally brainwash all the population. They teach the children the stuff they want them to know, and erase the memory from the previous ancestors, and change the history, telling the people that you are actually not slaves, but containing slavery as the hidden ruling agenda. So, and people are happy that they are not slaves, but actually the slavery still exists, as everybody can actually see. And we are paying the taxes for the things that we own, actually. And so this is contradicting the common sense. If you own something, you can't, pay the tax for it, because it's not a property, because
we're all citizens as defined, right? And citizens, if you really go back into legal definitions, you'll see that a citizen is synonymous with a subject, and a subject is a subordinate, which is a slave or a servant to a sovereign. And it's inherent in every, in the social contract. I went to philosophy. I have a bachelor in philosophy, and one of the things I found out was that it's very hard for the ethics people out there to argue anything else than the social contract. And the social contract is a concept that largely the English philosopher Hobbes developed, and later Immanuel Kant, he further developed the concept. And one of the interesting things is that they both say that you cannot conceive of a situation where the social contract is not necessary. Like it's as if forbidden to argue for the standpoint of just nature and anything else than the social contract. So beware of that. Like the Western philosophy tradition is just it's very subtle, some of the things it does, but it just left no literature to argue from that standpoint, where you don't consider the social contract, where you don't consider enslaving yourself or giving up your rights. Like they all say the logical thing to do is to give up your rights so a sovereign can protect you, because we're feeble creatures and we need protection. I reject that premise, and I'm not allowed to do that. Like it's not something in philosophy that they will have some old references to, like old discussions about this. They just, like the social contract theorists, they just rejected that possibility. They all argued from of course people will, give up their rights to be a citizen, and that's the starting point of the whole legal system. And if you look into the organizations that push birth certificates to Africans, they say clearly on their websites that if you don't have a birth certificate, you don't actually exist. Like they plainly stated.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? So they just deny the possibility of this. And I think it goes hand in hand with why you have to hide Great Tartaria, why you have to say it was just a geographical name. There was no nation, there was nothing. It's like this fixation upon things that are not under this legal system does not actually exist to them. Like I think that's the the mentality they're employing here. Like, yeah, they existed, but on our terms, they don't actually exist because we use our language, and by our definitions, they don't really exist, only nominally. But yeah, I digress on that. Philip, I wanted to go into details with the Mudflood a bit, because some of the first things I saw when I saw your videos were, and one of the things that really convinced me was that you don't use bricks as foundations. They will, soak with, and they will, moisture up, and that will compromise the whole building. You wouldn't use bricks underground. And that was one of the first things that really convinced me. And I saw that of one of your videos. So, like, do you think that you could say something about that? Like, some of those details that really show that, like, for the skeptics out there, because there are a lot of people that will say, yeah, they just, built basements and they only had bricks to do it. Like, can you explain perhaps why that is not the case?
Yeah, if we talk about the 19th century, we have a bunch of examples of both, where we have the official date of construction, and it's pretty much the same period. Like, we see two buildings, one has a basement, floor, and another one doesn't. So, and they're like standing maybe like close to each other, right? And so you go and check out the first one that has no basement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see that it has basement. Actually, it has basement, but it's you can see it only from the inside or something like this. So, and you often find out that those basement are just not one floor basement, but 2-3 floor basement if you go inside. So this is very interesting. And the one that has the basement floors, you go inside and you see that those windows are not the basement windows because they are like longer than the usual basement windows. And so you have to be, have an eye for those basement and non-basement windows that were actually bricked up and made to look as basement windows. So,
Right.
and there's a bunch of signs of those buildings. So they have the ugly entrances that are constructed nearby the building, maybe from the side, or maybe they have the entrance from the second floor, and they have like some ugly steps made, or maybe something like this. So stoops or whatever you call it. So this is like a whole bunch of signs. And for example, when we see some church and we see this evidence about the bricks that I'm looking like they make a foundation, but you dig a little bit deeper when you have like a restoration or something. You go to that church and you find out that they find a whole bunch of basement stones, foundation stones, a lot deeper than we saw before. So
Right.
It's like you have to just check for the restoration of this or that object, and you probably find some pictures from the previous, like 60s, 50s, like what you can find about White House or Capitol in USA, and you find that the basement is a lot the foundation is a lot deeper than you used to know. So
Yeah, I've seen those photos.
and you compare those photos, you see the pictures when it was no photo. It's like the beginning of the 19th century. You see that building, how it looked. Then you compare it with the first pictures of that building, like mid 19th century. Then you compare it to maybe the beginning of 20th century, and you see the cultural level isn't changing. So it's like the theory of cultural level is not working, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, if we can back up just a bit. Sorry to interrupt you, because like you have explained some of the reasons why when we see the bricks and the windows down there, and you can see it's a longer window than than you would have used if it really was for a basement you were constructing. And you can see on like a lot of the buildings, as you mentioned, that the real foundation stones were found way, way below the ground. So there's really something going on. But what if I say, okay, so there was dirt and things that crept up on side of the buildings, but what if I go to Wikipedia as a skeptic still and say, I reject the premise of the mud flood, something else might have happened. And then they go and they find this explanation you mentioned, cultural layers. And what will they find, Philip? They will find something about human activity and dirt and no cleaning, right?
Right now, officials are sticking to the theory of horse crab theory or cultural layer theory. So it's like pretty much the same because cultural layer is dependent on each and everything. Like it could be a coin or it could be a broken, broken vase or maybe I don't know some coal, or maybe like a sand. I don't know, maybe some salt from your window. I don't know. So it's like everything could be in cultural layer. But what we see is pure clay, 90% clay plus minus 10% of mud and dirt. So it's like almost pure clay. You can even make maybe ceramics from it. I don't know. So
Yeah,
and
they made mud bricks from it, as you showed with Richard, right?
yeah, a bunch of people made these tests, and you can make the clay from it, and eventually you can make bricks from the clay. So it's not very big problem. So that kind of explains that something happened, and that some liquid clay, some mud type of clay came from somewhere, and so that's where skeptics come and they say like about that flat areas, how did they got sunk with the mud and how those hills got sunk with the mud, because we see the both up hills and down hills. So and but it's easily explained with these mud volcanoes and drilling of miners that could be made before the mud flood event happened. So
Right.
mud volcanoes are, spread worldwide, and you can find those mud volcanoes everywhere. So, and if you cannot find the mud volcano right now, you probably find it when it's, erupting. And some people from Australia didn't know that they had mud volcanoes, and when the mud volcano started erupting near their windows, and they like found like a huge lake of mud in the morning, and it was all boiling, and I made this video with this clip, so people were kind of wondering, and it's really not a very big problem for some boiling stuff to come up from underground. So
Right.
we see a bunch of cases like this. You just have to Google it, and people have continuous mud eruptions in Indonesia, which are not even, stopped for a couple of decades already. So, and
And something that's very interesting with the mud volcanoes, Philip, if you've seen my video on the Boogeyman channel on YouTube where I talk about mud floods, it's a short video with music and pictures and text, but I show this old book that talks about geology in Russia, and it talks about this ongoing geological process of mud volcanoes changing the whole lands of your area in the past, and they call them elevations. So literally saying that the whole topography is elevated, meaning that it will, increase in its height, so it goes up higher. And it's just like when I read that, I was like, wow, these guys are saying that mud from mud volcanoes come up continuously and just rises the earth. And
yeah,
yeah, and one of the things they mentioned was that it hurls up a lot of these seashells and limestone, a lot of limestone. It comes up with it, like huge fragments of limestones. They talk about like mountains are formed by this process of huge rocks of limestones being hurled up. and they literally say that that is the process of some of those smaller mountains being formed, literally by mud volcanoes.
Yeah.
And then when we were in Spain, when we talked with you, Philip, Andreas and Stellium and I, we went up to see that star fort, you know, very close to the Elephant, Mount Go, and
Yep.
it was completely made out of limestone. So there is
Yeah,
like this
if you know
connection
Mike
here.
Ferrero, he was talking about huge amount of those mining activities, and I don't know, he was talking about leaching, and this mining activity called leaching, metal leaching. So they plug some some type of drilling into the earth, and under huge pressure they pump inside some chemicals like leaching chemicals, leaching solutions, and they leach out all those metal solutions which are contained like a mud. It's liquid mud, and it has calcium in it. It could have whatever metal solutions you have down there. So they first examine it with the drill, take the probes, examine the probes. They understand what kind of metals there's inside of those solutions underneath, and they plug a bunch of those chemicals there so they can, pump it out with a huge pressure, and they drill it out and have this, mud type of flow from underground. They pump it out, and then they plug those solution, dirt and mud and this solution into those sandbags, and those sandbags, dry out and become like huge um, concrete stones if they totally dry out, and they look like megalithic blocks.
Right.
And so this is how they take out all those metals, like with these filters and stuff like this. So they have each and every bag has a filter, and so this is like it's called um, leaching of metals, something like this. So miners have a bunch of inventions how to take all this stuff from underground. So, and that's why you can have something like limestone uh, type of solution that comes from underground, and you can easily find a huge hill from limestone in the middle of the field that doesn't have
Yeah.
any limestone. So
Around it, yeah. And they noted that in the geology book that, like, in a lot of the cases with the mud volcanoes, that in the surrounding area they will find they will find limestones, like large pieces, and then it's in like further surrounding area they won't find them, like indicating where the mud volcanoes were. So they were looking for those weird formations of limestones, and they would instantly assume that they were very close to an ancient mud volcano. So I found that interesting. And also when I scanned through the old archives of buried cities, I found a buried city in Missouri, like I think it was 300 feet below Missouri City. There was an ancient city down there, and they talked about regularly laid out streets and a fountain down there still having some water coming from it. And they talked they said that that water was highly impregnated with lime. So again, this thread of lime and things that are buried. And in the geology book, it also talked about that they found freshwater shells from the Volga 300 feet below Astrakhan. So 300 feet, that's about 100 meters below the city of Astrakhan. They found freshwater shells. Again, an effect that is coming from these mud volcanic eruptions. They hurl up shells and sea life. Like that is why we find sea life on top of huge mountains, which geology says is the process of billions or millions of years of geological, earthquakes and so forth, risings of mountains by tectonic activity and so forth. And that's why like the seabed has been pushed up to like the top of the Rocky Mountains or whatever. No, a much more possible explanation is that these mud volcanic eruptions are very large or have been very large in the past, and they literally create mountains.
Yeah, they could probably use the water from the rivers and oceans nearby. So they pump the water inside with all those maybe fish or maybe some organisms that could be you know stuck in the mud when it dries out and looks like it has like all those ancient organisms inside. But who knows what's in down there? We don't even know how many layers of this stuff we actually have. If it's growing up, just imagine how many layers do we have and how it all was composed before. So, and if we have somebody who's paying actually for all this terraforming, for all this mining, and let's not confuse people. If we're talking about miners who were messing around here, that's definitely not the mud volcanoes. It's just the drill holes that they created before, and they're just not stopping. And so this is how these Indonesian eruption was explained by the specialists that talk about the shale gas drilling in Indonesia that eventually ignited all this process that about 13 villages already sunk in the mud and it's not even stopping yet. So it's like 10 years or even more. So, and probably there's more evidence of that. And talking about the mountain eruptions, all the mountains actually have the evidence of mining. And so the mountains that right now are called volcanoes could also possibly be the stockpiles or the terracones of previous minor byproducts. So,
Yeah, at least a lot of them, right? Especially those that stand alone, like when they're really lonely mountains and they're like nearly perfectly conically shaped. That always struck me as odd. Like,
yeah, it depends on the scale of what and the methods that could be used in the mining. Because if you use rotor excavator, you probably have some shapes like a Grand Canyon or something, with this river type of basin of mining, with these turns like circles and stuff like this. So, and this is what rotor excavator does. If you have these block cave mining, you probably have evidence like sinkholes and huge drops of round craters and stuff like this. And we see a bunch of evidence of that when you have huge caves systems underneath and these round caves where people base jump from the top and film themselves falling down with this free fall. So, and then you have drilling and whole bunch of metal leaching, uranium mining and all this stuff, and that's where these volcanoes and mud volcanoes come out. So, and then you have terracones. If you don't cut the top of a terracone, it eventually blows up. It's like it's
yeah.
a process. It's not the question of how, it's the question of when it's going to be blowing up. So that's why the miners usually cut the top of the terracone so it doesn't blow up. I don't know. The system of the terracone, the shape of it, this pyramidical shape, creates some type of energy, and this waste byproduct mass starts melting inside of this terracone, and it becomes like a huge lava type of liquid, boiling reddish stuff that is with a huge temperature, comes out with explosion, sometimes with the smoke and maybe with eruptions of a gas or something. So
right. Well, yeah, and that is a very large subject, and Mike Ferreira has studied that a lot. As you may know, there is also another like camp on the whole volcanic subject. Like a lot of people like to think that while what you may say is true, they think that there are still some natural volcanoes left, like something that is not artificial. For instance, like the submarine volcanoes that
yeah,
come into being and disappear. like in the thousands, and we cannot seem to predict when they come and when they disappear.
Yeah, that's where comes the theory of the scale. So
Yeah.
when we talk about the gigantic people who probably lived before, and those type of people that were before them, even more bigger, and what type of mining could they do? So this what is looks like right now is like looking like natural thing, like natural volcano or something like it's really huge. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was probably something that was before the era that we know as the Empire of Ross and the Empire of Tartaria, and way before that. So
Yeah.
and that's
I
why
would
it
agree.
looks natural.
Yeah. And what do you think about some of these things also being their very large ancient buildings, like a subphotonic thing? He talks about melted buildings, and you know Weishaupt talks about that. Like a lot of it could also be yeah, just like as you said, a gigantic people of the very far past, the antediluvian period, so to speak. And whether they created buildings to live in is hard to pinpoint, right? But if they did, could it be possible that some of the very large structures, natural formations of stone, like we see in Petra, like or that something similar to Petra, could that be, you know, ancient buildings weathered or melted?
Well, I'd rather believe it's just the concrete that was, cut that way, and the those things that look melted. Sometimes they could be just the flow of the concrete, and it was like, drying out and stopping like this. So if you have ever seen how the mud flows or clay, liquid clay, it usually have this shape when it stops, because it's due to the pressure and due to the mass of the solution. It cannot just roll forever. It has to stop somewhere, and you have this circle type of edges. And so being something melted is not quite the explanation for everything that we see. So we have to make difference of the liquid concrete stuff that could be made as the mining byproduct, and we have to difference really the melted buildings if we see the evidence of those melted buildings. I didn't have a chance to watch the videos you're talking about right now, so I'll probably make a response video on that theory as long as I have time to
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
the
that
video.
would be very interesting. You go and I don't want to advertise this guy too well because what he did was that he looked at Stellium's video and completely ignored what Mike has researched. Everything Mike said he just ignored, right? And then he took one simple look at the mountain, sorry. And then he said, "This is a melted building." And then he pointed out some weird features that kind of looked like perhaps that it looked like a building. And then he completely ignored Mike and said that Mike was wrong and there are no titans. And so beware with this guy, but he has some apparently some okay videos on his theory about some of these things being melted buildings. So it would be
Yeah.
interesting for you to make a response video to that, because I think the community is a bit torn apart right now on the
No,
issue.
I don't think it's torn apart. It's just, there's always people who hide who, hunt for some sensation in the title, and maybe calling things that actually not really the way it's supposed to be called. I don't know. Maybe it's a clickbait, situation sometimes. So I'm familiar with marketing. I work with marketing. I know what clickbait is. So.
Hmm.
And I have probably used clickbait titles also before, to bring the attention of people to watch my videos, and maybe,
It's if you believe in your product, Philip, you should sell it.
well, whether or not it's a situation of selling something, You know, sometimes you are getting bored on YouTube. You maybe have, as what I've heard, he got his channel deleted something, and so he made this, new channel that is called Buildings, like Crying Buildings, something. So he like he was pretty aggressive with me in the comments. I don't know why. I'm not, his enemy or something. I think his name is Jerry, and I think we even had a chat together with Richard Lopez, something. So I'll make a response video on what he's trying to promote, and if that's a good idea, I'll say that's a good idea. Yeah, but I'm not totally I'm not confirming or rejecting any fact that he's from, because I haven't watched the video yet.
That's fair, man. But I would just, I would be interested to see a response video from you on that subject because,
what the thing was really disappointing me is the way he was pushing his agenda in the comments that don't even, on the topic of what he was trying to say. So it's like he's jumping in the topic and trying to say, look, I have this video, watch it. So it's like, it was looking kind of aggressive for me, because,
a bit desperate, right?
And yes, this situation with the Celium video, that he totally ignored the fact, and he even screenshotted the Celium videos, thumbnail, and said that this is a crying building. I mean, that is really ridiculous.
Yeah, it was, and Mike, I spoke with him about it, and that's I'm sure he won't mind me saying that he was really disappointed with the video. Like what Mike wants is someone who actually tries to debunk him on his points, like meet him eye to eye on his premises. But no one really seems to want to do that. Even Roger Spur was like, well, I think your research is okay, but I took a look on the mountain and it's a tendon ball. And Mike was like, well, how did you arrive to that conclusion? And what do you think is wrong with my research since you concluded something else? And he was like, no, I only make 100% claims. I'm Roger Spur, so yeah, it's a tendon ball. See ya, Mike. And like
the problem with Roger is, as long as my experience with communicating with him was not very long, because that was probably the first year I was on YouTube with my research of Mudflood, and so we kind of interacted, because he was trying to say something about mud fossils and I was talking about Mudflood, and so people were confused, because somebody probably found me and looking for him, and maybe somebody found him looking for me. So that was the intersection of the search results, and I also found him and recommended, and so I was like watching and saying, like, wow, he has some points. But at a certain point, when he was pointing at some cave looking like a women's
was a vagina.
Yeah, and he was pointed in the screen and pointing with his finger and saying that that was kind of funny, and I stopped watching because I'm not into this funny joke stuff. I was trying to be serious, and so when I want to laugh at something, I probably watch some comedy show and not watch Roger. So that made me each and every time I found his video, I was recalling that situation, and that made me laugh. So, yeah.
That is quite funny. Sorry to. Well, I remember seeing that as well, and just thinking, wow. But what really did it for me was he had a rhetoric on the Apennine giant from what is it, Florence in Italy. You know that it's like this large statue of a Slavic-looking man, and then like it looks like something materialized on his beard. It looks like he was partly melted, right? Have you seen that one? It's like in front of a lake.
Perhaps I missed a bunch of his video, and perhaps I should have watched some of him. But I've seen some of his decent videos, and I figured the idea. That's probably why a lot of people follow him, because this idea of something biological that was petrified, and now you're looking at it as a mountain or a hill is kind of what I'm trying to say in my research, because you cannot just, point at something and say that this is a hill or this is a mountain or this is a frozen, elephant. You have to
Well, it
research
became
and prove it,
mainstream very recently, Philip. Sorry to interrupt you, because like we have been, arguing with the mainstream people saying that biology does not, petrify that quickly, and we don't have these old creatures petrified, or giant creatures. But like there was a very recent article from Daily Mail, I think it was only 2 days ago, where they talk about fossilized, let me see if I can find it, I got it here. Fossilized shells of ancient armadillos, the size of Volkswagen Beetles, that roamed the earth 20,000 years ago, they say, right? Discovered in Argentina. And they have a photo, and they look like very large armadillos. So like this is petrified biology. So we're only talking about scales now, it would seem, Philip, because the mainstream archaeological community is pretty much researching the same thing on the same premises. And now they have shown the community a large, gigantic animal that exists today, but just in gigantic size and completely petrified into stone.
Yeah,
So
perhaps we also can find a bunch of evidence of ancient technological devices that are also petrified, and that is not
yeah,
as explainable as finding some biological creature.
well, they have
And that's
found
what.
such things, Philip, but when they find them, they just call them anomalies. So they just
Oh,
say these are anomalies. They look like
uh,
ancient technology, but we cannot explain them, and then we just ignore them and forget about them.
there was a guy, Wakey or something. He was trying to make a video that was called something like F World Geology, F Earth Geology, something like this. So,
Yeah, right.
and
Wiki.
yeah, and he also mentioned something about Mudflood, and I made a response video on my part concerning the Mudflood, and I think he had some ideas on what you're talking about, the questions you put up right now. So probably perhaps you should rewatch that video about geology. But anyway, what I found actually is that we had some institutions that actually educate those people about geology, and all this stuff is sponsored by the mining concerns. So those mining corporations, because they recruit those people for those geological intelligence, they have to find a bunch of resources and they have to excavate them quickly and as cheap as they could. So that's why all this geology is based on funding by the mining corporations, and they probably ignore the facts that we were talking about right now. So
Right, yeah,
including biological facts, because
right.
you have to just watch the soil map of each and every country and find the evidence, and we see the places that are completely filled with this clay and mud, and we see the places that are not even touched by it. So I'd say the mud flood I'm trying to research was it was a selective and it was a targeted event. So they probably chose the places that they wanted to flood, and they probably chose them concerning I would say the meaning, the price of what they were doing. So probably bigger cities were the main targets. So, and you probably harvest a bunch more from the city and take whatever you want from the city during this mud flood. So, because the people are actually paralyzed, the system is paralyzed, and nobody can move from their houses. I've talked about the mud also being an explanation of something that was trying to eliminate the circumstances of the ancient attack that could be performed on Tartaria. And so, like, if they dropped a bunch of bombs there or some biological weapon, I don't know, something like that could be settled as a deposit on the streets and stuff like this, and also a bunch of those people who were dead and all those corpses and each and every made type of disease could come from those areas. So they also could be using clay and mud to deactivate the area from those circumstances and
That's interesting.
from those consequences of that attack. So of those corpses, those dead biological substances that are not favorable, and all those biological weapons, diseases, radionuclides also can be contained with the level of the clay and mud.
Right, that's a good point. Like it cleans up like toxic waste
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
biological viruses and stuff. It cleans it all up and it resets everything.
Yeah, and you can come and you can inhabit the area because it's easily
Why do you
fully
think,
populated.
Philip, that we see, because like a huge topic for me also when I looked into this at first, I found the missing people photos. And as I said earlier on, we have all these themes playing out in all countries, right? And the missing people photos is something I have found in nearly every country I've looked for old photos of. And Philip, why do we sometimes see like the missing people photos with clean streets and no mud?
Yeah, if we research the history of the photograph itself, the officials would tell us that at around 1840s they had a first photograph that were having to have a very long exposure, and that's why they explain that nobody is visible in the pictures. But at the same time, they tell us that at around 40s they already had the exposure to be like for 5 seconds, at 5 to 30 seconds at least. So it's like it's not very long exposure. At least you have to see the shadows of people moving, and we see those shadows on some pictures. And at the same time, we see a bunch of pictures with missing people in the 60s. That's where all the main part of those pictures come. And they are dated at around 1860s, 1865. And at that time, the officials said that the photographs had the exposure even shorter. So it's like 5 to 15 seconds. So at this exposure, you probably see not only the shadows of the people or the blurring shapes, you probably see the shapes of the people, even if they move. So, but at the same time, we see the streets that are empty, and we see like 3 or 4 people on the huge picture of the city that only exist. And we see that this is not early morning because the shadows from the building and from these, columns, Alexander column, for example, in St. Petersburg, show it that it's around 3 o'clock in afternoon. So at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the 1 million populated city should have a bunch of people on the streets, right?
Right.
And we see like around 4 people and 2 cabs and maybe one person working or excavating something on the street, and that's it. And
Yeah, it
looking at the
always
window.
strikes me as if like when we look at a lot of these pictures and photos, like we see there's obviously the guy who's taking the photo, and then we see sometimes a few buggies with horses, and it's nearly always buggies. So it's like they're roaming through the city in like a group of people, and they're traveling together through the city and documenting the empty city. That's what
Yeah,
it looks like. Like when I
it's
really
like,
think about it, like when I do the philosophical exercise, like when imagine like you're when you get up tomorrow that you see the world completely with like as if you were born that day. You know nothing about being human, what your name is, like you're supposed to imagine yourself in a state of having your memory wiped and like being born that day. If you look at all these photos when you wake up in a state of that, I tried to do that as honest as I could, right? And the thing that kept my intuition kept telling me was that these people we see in the photo, they're like this caravan of people roaming through the empty cities, and documenting it for someone in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s.
Yeah, at the same time, we see a bunch of stage pictures where people actually appear on them, and we appear a bunch of groups of people, and some of them people look to be, staging the picture, and they explain it as like, people had these photographs to be very rare and expensive thing, and so they like, were preparing for it and standing for like 30 seconds and not even moving and stuff like this. So it's like, but you see that the pictures totally contradict the narrative. I mean, sometimes people show the gestures and signs of some, presence of being somebody like a mason or something, like wearing black hats, hiding hands into
and bending his knee.
yeah,
Also that
and like
bending the knee.
yeah, and the rest of the people like standing and trying to excavate the area, looking like they're working or something, or maybe those people with the hidden hands are like, controlling them to, managing or something, some, cleaning up the area. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that could be easily explained. Like you had not very much people, and that's why you made those stage photos, and people be looking like they were like doing something not very important. But actually, what they were doing cleaning up the streets, and they were
And maybe
preparing
that's
those
why they
cities.
all have the same clothes. Like
Yeah,
that maybe
of course.
explain the same clothing because it was given to them by the same organization of people who they're working or acting for. They're
Yes, it's
acting out
simply we don't
history.
have any colors in those pictures, and we can only imagine what were the colors back in the days. But I bet they didn't have any colors, so I bet they were like dressing all these dirty black clothes, and that's it. So,
Yeah.
and this is gray and black era of poor people who were enslaved by those who were telling them to clean up the streets and prepare the cities for the future populations that could be brought from the rural areas that were not touched by those reset technologies like Mudflood and stuff like this.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
why we see a bunch of people like hanging out on the streets in the late 90s. And the streets are like flooded with people, a bunch of people like hanging around. We see all those first cinematic examples when people are trying to film the movies, those no sound movies, and we see a bunch of people like in Ireland, and they looking like they were not even working at all. They were like just hanging around in the streets and stuff like this. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
But
looking like totally
but
wasted, totally poor era, and I don't know what they were actually doing to survive. But at the same time, we see pictures where a bunch of kids were working, and I don't know. That kind of contradicts. I wouldn't say that is totally confirmable.
well, one thing that stands out to me, like when we explain the missing people photos that we find in nearly all countries and big cities in the 1860s, 50s, and 40s. Why it's connected to the Mudflood research is because, like, there was a reset, and if a mudflood happens, then the people of that city that was buried, they're gonna be reset. So they're either dead or they left, or those are probably the only two options. So
Yeah, the city of a construct itself could be a trap for those who come to it, live there for a couple of centuries, and when the city gets resetted, everybody gets getting robbed. I don't know. Maybe we know something that we actually don't know for the real purpose of what we're doing. So
but like
who
if it
knows?
was a mud volcano that did it, like you would is as in Indonesia, you would be able to predict the mud in many cases. You would be able to see it from afar, and people would say, oh, okay, there's a mud volcano and it's very close to our city, so we will have to evacuate because it's gonna do as we know it's gonna do, as our forefathers said, right? Like they're gonna bury the city. So
Whoever controls the knowledge, and they were gonna, bring you the information. or not. So if you deserve to know the information, you probably get prepared for leaving the city before something happens. And we've got some examples of that recently when we had the flood in the city of Krimsk, when all the government of that city was evacuated and nobody told the people, and that was night, and the dam was damaged, and a huge amount of mountain rivers were dropped down below the
Wow.
hills, and that city was flooded in the night, and nobody knows actually how many people died. So the government says like very low numbers, and somebody was saying about huge numbers like 3,000-4,000 people. So if that's an urgent situation and the reset is happening to the area, and they probably won't tell everybody. So the no
Right.
panic and no leaks of information would be preceded, because somebody is probably going to tell somebody, and so this would probably not give them the result they want. So
Yeah, but did you get like when I saw your video of Indonesia, you also mentioned, I think, if I recall correctly, that the flow of the mud volcanoes, like it spreads out slowly, like slowly enveloping the land.
slowly, but when it's in the field, it's rather slow, because
Yeah,
it has to flow in all direction. And when it's in the streets, and the buildings contain the most volume from the square from the area, right? And so the streets are narrow, and so
yeah, it flows
uh,
quickly. Yeah, I get
yeah,
that.
it's gonna be flowing quickly. And so if we talking about the night, it could be easily like do it in 6 hours. You're gonna come out of the door and you're gonna see the clay and mud. You won't be able to walk. So
Right.
it's a question of couple of hours, I think. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
cannot
yeah,
leave.
and I would think you're right, but do you think that is why that we don't see a lot of skeletons lying around in the mud by, when they excavate buildings? Like,
No, we see a lot. We see a lot, in fact, because each and every excavation in Moscow ends up finding a couple of dozens of skeletons with an unexplained, explanation of how they actually died.
oh,
Because the position of all those skeletons show us that they were dragged by some flow, and even the position of the body is a science, actual in criminology. So you can tell how the person died depending on the
oh.
position that
Could
he
you
was found.
perhaps also, and not to be a pain in the butt, Philip, but could you perhaps make a video on that topic alone?
Yeah, we had a bunch of videos, but those videos are censored by YouTube, because you're talking about the dead bodies and corpses. So
Oh,
actually, this is not very YouTube. But believe me, maybe I'll mention that thing and leave a link maybe in the description. Sometimes you can easily translate or the video that was talking about it already, and who doesn't care actually about their channels. So
right.
maybe they are not even deleted right now. But I've seen a bunch of videos talking about it, and probably each and every example of excavation in Moscow shows that they find something in the basement, and it's like the plates and the dishes and the cups and stuff like this, that in a pretty good condition, and on the depth of like 5 to 6 meters deep. So how can you explain that? So somebody who would, dig a ditch to hide, some dishes underground for 6 meters deep? I don't know. That's probably not even a good explanation. So when you find the gravestones underneath are buried for like the same depth, like near one church near
Mm.
Moscow, when they excavated all around the church, they found out that the gravestones from the like 17th century are below the ground like 6 meters. So this is not even a dead body, but it's a gravestone with coffin underneath. I don't know. So it's how did it appear to be buried then?
Well, that is clear that you cannot explain it other than, I like to say mud or dirt or earth accumulated on top of the existing things, right? Because then you cannot refute it. Because some say like, oh, it wasn't a flow of mud. It could have, been liquefaction or something. I'm like, we don't even
Yeah,
need to discuss it because the end result is that Earth got on top of Earth, right? So
yeah.
that is the
Liquefaction was
main
easily
deal.
erased. When we were talking about liquefaction, we were talking about the earthquakes as the main cause of this vibration that caused the frequency, that caused
Right.
this liquefaction of each and every subject. And we're talking about those flows of these liquid soil and mud and rock and whatever. But when we see the houses in this flow, the houses totally collapse. So you cannot explain the totally contained and preserved houses and brick walls that are not even cracked, being
Exactly.
struck by the liquefaction. So that could work in some areas probably if we find the evidence of that, and that could be explaining maybe of some weaponry that could be targeting the flesh flood from the hill, maybe or whatever.
Well,
So
something I found, Philip, is that there's references to when there is a mud volcanic eruption, there was also fire from the sky. Like there is like this very mysterious plate that was posted in one of the Mudflood groups. It was from a guy that never showed
yeah,
himself again, I
fire from the
think.
sky. Yeah, fire
Yeah,
from the sky.
1791 in Crimea, in the island of Taman.
Yeah, have you heard about the sulfur and the properties of sulfur and mining of sulfur? So if the sulfur mine is blowing up and it looks like a volcano or something, some explosion, and all these sulfur parts are also being thrown into the air with the explosion, and it falls down like melting and burning stones and rocks, and maybe some drops of the sulfurs fall down on the ground, and while they're burning in the sky, and so it looks like a rain of fire. So this is just sulfur mining, and I've been talking about it as the place that right now is named to be Sodom and Gomorrah in Israel or close to Israel. So it also was looking to be a sulfur mine, and it has sulfur signs each and everywhere. So all this area is sulfur contained, rocks, and everything is sulfur there. So if the
Hmm.
sulfur gets burned, it easily can look like a fire of,
Yeah,
fire
that's
rain.
that's that's true. That's definitely true. But there is like on the picture, it looks like plasma electricity, but that's only on the picture, of course.
Yeah, the volcanoes, when the volcanoes erupt right now, you can easily see the lightning in the
Right,
sky right above the volcano. It's because of these, atmospheric electricity and static electricity that's also been producing. And this area is even more secret than what we are talking right now, because everybody
right.
knows that something was before, and something like wireless electricity or harvesting electricity or something like this. But
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like the electro voltage, just the potential. Just I think it's
the higher you get, the more voltage you get. So it's like,
yeah,
you can. It's like, the distance, the curvature calculator or whatever. So it's like geometrical progression. So the more you get up, the higher this, difference of voltage will be. So that's why you can explain those spires and um, huge heights of those cathedrals. So
right.
even the name of cathedral could, tell a lot. So
Cathode. Yeah,
yeah, so it's
cathode.
like, and so you're probably also familiar with this, technologies, or looking like technologies, construction and architecture details.
Yeah, yeah. We made a couple of videos on it already.
Yeah,
So yeah, I find it very interesting, but like a lot of people is complaining that the only thing that some research is the only thing they will do is just show you endless photos of different antennas and say, oh look, here's another antenna, and oh look, here's another, and it just gets tedious, perhaps the right word. Some people are annoyed by it, like Static in the Attic. He said like. oh, this is the standard of research in this community, and that's why he doesn't want to get affiliated with, you know, us, the Tartarian researchers community. And I'm like, okay, fine, but
I don't get the idea
stereotype
though.
fallacy. Yeah, it's a stereotype fallacy nonetheless, but still, some people say it's getting a bit boring. We should, you know, try to create our own or try to replicate it and try to find some very good evidence for it. And what are your thoughts on that, Philip? How could we do that?
Evidence on what? On this electricity stuff?
Yeah, like
Well,
some good
it doesn't,
evidence
you
that the
know,
old ones are doing it.
the first year I was doing it, the guy contacted me, and in one of my videos, I probably find the link. He had a channel. That guy, he was, you know, trying all these experiments with those air balloons and those wires tied to those air balloons, and he was measuring all this electricity, and he was finding that it actually works. And I believe, because I seen each and every experiment that he was doing, and I actually promoted his channel back in the day.
Oh.
So I probably say that each and every person has to do what he can do. I can do what is easy to me right now, and I can help the community with that. And this is the work on YouTube. And
Right.
if you're good in electricity and may do some experiments, you should do that, and, you know, tell us actually what works and what doesn't work. And but you're supposed to try it the correct way, because people trying it and they say that it works, and they show us it in the videos. So,
Right.
and this is not the only guy. Actually, it was that guy who had a channel, Aaron Dover or something. He also made a bunch of experiments. I probably missed most of his videos, but people say that he did good experiments back in the day. So
Yeah,
and
Eric Dollard, yeah, great guy.
Aaron Dover or something like this.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. But yeah, shout out to both then.
Yeah, and so I don't know who is more familiar with making radio shows should make a radio show. The guys who are more familiar with filming should do filming. The people who can write should write articles, like you know,
Right.
the kick-ass articles, like the guys like Blue do and stuff like this. You know, she's writing very good articles and people reading it. Although I'm not actually agreeing with each and every information that she's providing, but I like the
Same with
style
me.
and the attention that people get. So I mean, you should do what you can do and what you like to do, and if you know how to debunk the Mudflood, you should tell us, because we are like stuck in the middle of
Oh.
this theory, and we are trying to
That
finish it.
reminds me, Philip. Like we have a lack of Mudflood debunkers out there, but when I saw what you did to that Australian filmmaker, like I have been on his channel endlessly debating with him in the comments, right? And he is such a turd. Sorry. But he's a very, very, very manipulative, deceptive guy, and I found that out very quickly. But Phil, when I saw that you found out his background and completely decimated him, I was like, damn, like that's some gangster stuff right there.
Well, I had an
How
experience.
did you find out? How did you find out who this guy was, and why were you researching him so deeply?
Oh, well, I wasn't planning to do that, because, you know, but first of all, he was, you know, saying that I started talking about him first, but that is wrong. He came to my channel, and I found that comment, because it's each and every comment is being saved by my Gmail, and I know who's writing what comment. But at that time, he wrote that comment that Mudflood is some bunch of bullshit. So that was kind of polite comment at first, but I didn't answer it, and that's probably what pissed him off. And he made a video saying that Mudflood is defeated. So, and that was the first video that I saw about him, and so he was like pointing first building that he found probably in his city of Brisbane, and that was the building with the basement windows. And so it was pretty easy to debunk the mudflood with the building that was built after the mudflood, and with the basement windows instead of buried windows. So, but that's what I said in that response video. I said, look, guy, you're trying to debunk the Mudflood with the building that was built in the late 19th century, while everybody's talking about the middle of 19th century or even before that. So it's like no logic at all. And that's when I forgot about him, like, because I had an experience of making the same investigations on different guys like Simon Dan, who ended up to be a tutor, a loser tutor who made a business on tutoring people astronomy and maybe some math, I don't know. But he was a tutor on astronomy. He doesn't even have a science degree or something. He's like, just an ordinary school teacher, not even school teacher, just a tutor. So he's just a student, I would say. So he has maybe a higher education. That's it. So, and that guy has like a couple of 100,000 subscribers already. So, and I made a video about making money on debunking. He is debunking a bunch of stuff, and he was also mentioning the Mudflood. So, not my video, but he was talking about Barnabas Nagy, I think. And that another guy also popped out. His name is Darren Smith, and his channel is Creaky Blinder. So he saw the video that I made about him and Simon Dan, and he made a reaction video on my video. Sent a bunch of people, sent a bunch of trolls to my channel. They were commenting and putting dislikes on that video about making money on debunking. So I made the response video on his video, find out exactly who he was, showing the people that he's exactly what I was saying, and so on and so forth. And that's a bunch of time passed along, and so one subscriber sends me a message that this Australian dude again making debunking videos about the Mudflood. So
Atheist Dominion, right?
Atheist Dominion, yes. And I was saying all these guys, don't do this and don't mention me at all. And that's the best recipe you can get not to be exposed by who you actually are. And probably he didn't see it. I don't know. He didn't see this, thing that I suppose.
But how did you find out that his background? Like, what led you on to him being?
The investigation was completely shown in a video. That's just nothing to add to there. So I just watched what he was making his channel about. Found out that he was making the channel about atheism. And I saw that he doesn't get any response on those essays, although he had some likes and dislikes percentage, and it was a pretty good one. But then he eventually started to debunk stuff, and that was like a topic book, because each and every debunker starts with the videos talking about space and stuff like this, and trying to debunk those who are alternative in that area. And then he started to make a video about Mudflood. So this is like exactly like about Simon Dan, like about that Creaky Blinder stuff. So this is exactly the same example. And I was thinking if he is also some type of loser or something. And probably I saw how he is posing and acting on camera. And I figured that he might be actually an actor, and in an actor base or casting base of the database of those people who work in casting, like somebody found like Martin Liedtke had an IMDb profile, like profile net casting.
Nathan Oakley has one as well.
Maybe so I figured maybe he also had. So I started to search people who's looking exactly like him. And so I found that guy who's supposed to be a director from Hollywood. So a loser director from Hollywood.
I was so happy when I saw it, because I had been, just having some weird idiotic debates with him. And then I just saw your video and I was like, oh, this guy is such a loser. And he's busted now. And like, do you know, has he made any videos since that? Or responded?
Well, nobody wrote me anything, so I don't think we should check it. But so he was trying to, I was, he was trying to respond something like this in the comments. I was checking like what he's responding to people who tell them that, look, he made a video about you, and he was saying, I'm still gonna continue the debunking process of the Mudflood and stuff like this. But I found him on Facebook, wrote him and said, like, why are you so pissed off? Like, don't be pissed off, man. Because he came to my channel with a different name and started to write me stuff, like pretending to be a woman and stuff like this. So, I
Oh
mean,
no. Oh
yeah.
Lord.
Yeah, and so I
Wow.
figured that was him and said, look, that is actually him. Went to his Facebook and wrote him, why are you so pissed off? Why are you writing all these shitty comments here and stuff like this? So, and I
Well,
figured that was him because he was answering the same words like that female in the comments. So, I mean, they were actually saying exactly the same words, and that's why I found out that that was actually him. So
wow. Yeah, they are always this like what it's such a common theme with these trolls or debunkers that they are just so disingenuous. Like they just lie about like small stuff, of course, about themselves, but they just keep on lying and lying and lying. And whenever you take them in lying and screenshot it and
yeah,
force them to confront it, they just keep on doubling down and tripling down on their lies. And it's
people like
just like
researching it
they
for
sell it.
3-4 years of research. We probably answered all the questions already. Amongst the questions you were asking me today, I've had more questions on the topic of how it was looking, and I made a series of videos and like saying each and every question, like it was called the Mudflood puzzle or something like this. So
Right.
it was a huge playlist, and I was answering each and every question, and I was making live videos each and every day and answering question in the live chat, and so I thought I already answered everything. I thought I already explained all the theories like cultural layer and all this stuff that doesn't work, and basement theory that doesn't work, and all this stuff. But still, they're popping out the people who didn't have time to watch all those videos, and they think that they're so geniusly bright that they can explain it just like that while watching one or two of my videos and saying, oh, this is basement explanation, oh, this is cultural layer explanation, oh, this is exposure explanation, and so on and so forth. So
Do
I'm
you
just
know,
saying,
Philip,
before you claim it's something.
that cultural layer theory is not found on the English and the European Wikipedias? It's only found on the Russian one, apparently.
Yeah, because the Russian scientists were the first ones who started to react on this information, because the information was flowing for a couple of years. Nobody responded it. And the guy who was funding it was actually busted by the cops last year after he murdered his wife, who
What?
was actually his student. Yes, this guy who was funding it, funding all this information, who was the guy who was, he had some, agent with the same last name, and I believe that his relative or something. And that guy is owning the website and the project that gains the grants from the government, and that's the project is called the Scientists Against the Alternative Information. So, and they are trying to explain each and every conspiracy, as what they call it, um, including the Mudflood, and they try to explain it not with the cultural layer already. They explained it with the horse crab theory. So, like in the 19th century, people were riding horses, and so the horses used to crab, and so a bunch of this crab was on the street. Nobody was picking it up, and so it was flowing like a river, and it was growing, 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 and so people figured out that uh, the windows should be closed and they should move to the second floor. So, and that was really the explanation. And the poor people went to the basement floors. I don't know.
They lived it down under the horse crap. And
Yeah.
apparently the horses that didn't mind walking in their own sea of horse crap, because like if it really was believable, then the horse crap would never get that far because people would have had to do something about it. It wouldn't
And I'll
be
tell you,
like, yeah, they would have to clean or move out
and I,
very quickly. It
and
wouldn't,
I'll
get
tell
to the
you,
point of 10 meters.
and I'll tell you that those guys probably don't know English, because if they knew English, they would probably know that horse crap equals lies in English. So that's not quite the example to explain something like this. So
Oh yeah, have you heard about the horse crap theory? Yeah, that doesn't really ring. That's not, a grade A in rhetoric. But
yeah, and the explanation of no trees in 19th century, they explain it as like we have the photographs with no trees in 19th century and the beginning of 20th century. Also, the Gorsky project, who filmed almost all the Russia, and you find a bunch of his pictures comparing what they look right now, and you see all those trees around right now, and you don't see any trees around those places when he was filming it 100 years ago and more than 100
right.
years ago. And so the officials explain it like people were cutting trees, and so they were like building houses and fueling the houses with the wood. So they cut all the trees around. So
Yeah, but
what?
they're not around the cities, right? Maybe they're out cutting trees, Philip. That's why they're not in the cities.
Yeah, just imagine the amount the amount of smoke that should be around the world. So if they cut so many trees and they
Oh,
burned it up.
but that explains why we cannot see any clouds on the old photos because
Oh,
of all the white smoke, Philip. Now
oh,
they got their explanation. Damn. Now we're defeated. I'm only kidding, Philip. But you know what I mean? Like in all the old photos, that you cannot see the old clouds because it's just a white background.
yeah, perhaps a bunch of anomalies, including the money and these banknotes anomalies that we observe right now. I was stopped at the USA, and I'm probably continue on European money pretty much soon. And but I saw a bunch of examples in Russia also that show us that there were some anomalies with the banknotes in the 19th century,
Right.
as in, so whoever controls the money controls the process of the reset. So I probably say that that's the key, and whoever is funding it could be having profit in it. So what we know is colonization of areas of Aboriginal areas is often related with mining of natural resources from that area and stealing them for very low price, right? Or exchanging them for something not important, like some fake jewelry and stuff like this. So
Right.
buying lands for a single axe or a hammer of iron, and buying an island for that, and it's not very fair. Although that iron axe could be very important for that tribe or local people, it doesn't cost the island. So all this information is actually bringing us to the certain point of understanding how it could be all performed during the reset. So the people came and they just stole the land, exterminated the local people, and changed the governments. And so that's why we see the ancient evidence of such unexisting kingdoms, like Kingdom of Florida, with the European looking guy with Indian feathers head on him,
Right. Oh,
looking
we
like,
only we have about 2 to 3 minutes left. Just to quickly
yeah.
remind you.
So a bunch of those countries that still not exist, they could be actually the regions and the districts of the previous Union Empire that was actually before the Tartarian times. So, and this all could be just a war and the echo of that reset that was before. So, and that's why we see all these countries fighting even in nowadays.
Right. Yeah, there's like the world wars, for instance, has a lot to do with the older wars, and there probably was a few more world wars back in the day that has been either named something else, like the take some of the older wars before First World War, and some of them will perhaps include a lot of countries, and you will perhaps ask yourself, why wasn't this called a world war? Because it included a lot of different continents. So yeah, but we only have a minute left, so to speak, and about a minute. So I'll just quickly remind the listeners that you're listening to Revolution Radio on Studio B, Radio Tartary, and we are listener supported. So without the listener, there will be no radio. So please go into freedomslips.com and or revolution.radio, and you'll find our website. And there's a few different ways you can donate to the cause, because we are only funded by our listeners. So please. And Philip, do you have any closing remarks here on the?
Yeah, we started with the branding of this event, in calling it a Mudflood, coining this brand. So, as what I started before, I'd say the brand is what actually protects the actual meaning of stuff from the regular people, from the common people. So, research the brands and research the real meanings, what is hidden and closed by the brand.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a good point, because it does not only include flood and mud. It is a very large topic, and especially when you marry it with Tartaria and put it all together into revisionist history, it just becomes just the largest story on Earth. Like it's the biggest story and includes everything, and it's going to take the world by storm, little by little, slowly but steadily, like the tortoise slowly gaining on the hare in the race. So yeah, look out for the Mudflood. And Philip, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting. Thanks for inviting.
Yeah, no problem, man. I would like to have you on another time. So, and thank you, Philip, and thank you for listening. And yeah, tune in next Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m. Central European Time and 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another show of Radio Tartary. And with that, I'll sign off. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Bye.